Welcome to It's Beyond the Food. I'm your host, Stephanie Dozier, non-diet nutritionist, cognitive behavior coach, and founder of the non-diet coaching certification. And today we're going to talk about the psychology of the future self and its impact on behavior change. Now, I want to clear about something. This is not about manifesting. This is not some woo-woo stuff. It's not vision boarding. This is what we call identity work. And that is what is inside of the science of behavior change. And I believe that is the piece that has been missing from a lot of people's approach to weight neutral health. And in some cases, people have walked away from the weight neutral approach to health because they claim, quote, it didn't work. And every time I am faced with one of those clients, because I get a lot of people where it's their last recourse, there's very little, if not any, identity work that has been done in their approach by which they're not satisfied with. So that is what we're going to talk about today. Now, before I dive in, I want to thank everyone who has sent me communication, sent me a message about our new series of expert podcast episode called Beyond GLP-1. In one particular Facebook group that I'm part of, I had so many comments about how much people needed this. There's only been one side covered in media through GLP-1, and it's been, the side of diet culture. So thank you very much. And genuinely, I appreciate each one of you. And if you haven't yet started to listen to Beyond GLP-1, you can use the link in the show note to access it. We made it easy for you, put it all into one web page so you can see the interview that have been published already and all the interviews coming up. So thank you. Now I want to come back to the psychology of the future self because I have a lot to say and I want to keep it short and concise for episode. Give you some context as to how I was inspired to create this episode. Actually came from the program I've launched in the spring called Groundwork, where I take people through the process of doing the groundwork, which is really the identity work. And it's a mentorship program that I do with women who, in most cases, all the students I have for this round, I've done work on their own personal journey with food and body image. And for multitude of a reason, it hasn't stuck. They're still challenged and they're still wanting more. And the common thread is moving from intellectualization to embodiment. And inside of that program last week, I left them with one question to reflect on, which is this one. I'm going to share it with all of you. What does your future self believes about herself? That version of you who has a year from now exited, offboarded the groundwork, what does she believe about herself? What does she believe about her relationship to food? What does she believe about her body? That version of you from 1 year from now, what is her belief system? That was an open-ended question that required them to sit and reflect and make decision about what they wanted to believe. And that's very uncomfortable. And that was reflected in our debrief on Monday mornings, which is when we have our weekly call, give them their assignment, their reflection question, and then we debrief on Monday. And it was uncomfortable. It was highly uncomfortable. Some people went through the full procrastination, avoidance, and when they digged into finding out why they were avoiding and uncomfortable is they didn't know what to believe, or they thought that what they wanted to believe about themselves, their body, and food was too far off. It was too pretentious. It was too strong. Someone else came back and said it was like a blank state. Like I never asked myself these type of questions before. So when I put that question on top of a page in my journal, the page was blank. Like I didn't know what to write, what to answer. And instead, what I did is I started Googling. I started listening to podcast episodes from you about beliefs and body image and what are the beliefs that we can have. And then I started to transmute that into the belief that I wanted for myself because I couldn't find them on my own. And another person said that it felt too foreign. They were completely separated from that version of them. And these three patterns that I outlined for you are very common. And it got me thinking about, particularly in the context of GLP-1, and also a conference that I attended on Friday about, like, I was reflecting on the last 5 or 6 years of our industry, right? Call it the anti-diet, the weight neutral approach to health, and why we are not seeing the same popularity of our message. And kind of, I'm in the investigation stage of that reflection, and I've been spending a fair amount of time in Reddit thread and subthread of Reddit, and there's a whole section of Reddit that's dedicated to intuitive eating and GLP-1. I highly recommend that you go browse around that and see, because of the anonymity of Reddit, you get really powerful insight from people. And there's a lot of people that feel that intuitive eating, body image work, weight inclusive approach has failed them. The process has failed them. And when I start reading, it's clearly, in my professional opinion, because the work stayed too surface level. It stayed at the behavior level. And for whatever reason, either they did it on their own, that the person they work with did not take them there, did not ask the uncomfortable question I asked my student last week. It stayed at the surface level. And at some point, the behavior came back, the old behavior came back, the old struggle came back because the identity work wasn't done. And that's what I wanted to cover today, is that I call it the future self work. In order for us to really get grounded into what we need to think, feel, the behavior we want to have, and bring that work back in our day-to-day life and really lean on that future version of ourselves to make decisions in the day-to-day. So let's name it future self work. And the one thing I want you to understand is future self work and identity work are the one and the same. They're not separate. Identity work is that ongoing mental, emotional, social process of investigating and then building and maintaining our sense of self, or commonly known as our self-image, what we believe about who we are. Identity work is at the core of behavior change because belief system drive our thinking pattern on the daily, and these pattern then shape our emotional response, and our emotional response is what drives our behavior, and the sum of our behavior is the reality, the outcome, the result that we experience in our life. So it's a chain of element connected together. So if you're trying to change, for example, your relationship to food or your body image or any health behavior, and you're only working at the behavior level, you're working at the end of the chain process. And the beginning, the quote, identity keeps pulling you back. So when we think in terms of future self, we want to think about two phases. The first phase of doing future self work is what we call the discovery or the unintentional thinking. You don't start by focusing on who you want to become. You start by asking, why am I where I am right now? So when I work with someone on body image, for an example, my first question isn't, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? Is why are you currently thinking the way you think about your body? How do you feel about your body right now? What kind of behavior, self-care, eating behavior do you currently experience in your life? And what reality and how you would describe it, you client, reality are you experiencing with your body? That's what we call the unintentional model. The thoughts, the feeling, the behavior, the operating system, what's on autopilot that produce the reality you are experiencing right now, the one that you want to change. This is where we start, because we can't build towards a future self if we don't understand our current self and what's running at the present moment. Phase two is looking at that future self. I call it construction. Once the model, the current model is very clear to us, here's what we believe and here's what we think on the daily, we feel, we behave, we can begin to think about what do we want. So the current reality you are experiencing with your behavioral pattern right now that you no longer want, what do you want it to be in the future? So if we think in terms of body image, most of the time women will tell me, I want to be confident, which is great, but that's a feeling, right? That is a feeling. Confidence is an emotion. That's a feeling. That's not the reality of your future self. Now, we have to bring that at the, what I call it, the very detailed version of your future life. And we need to ping that across various domain in your life. So for an example, that future version of yourself who feels confident in her body, how does she dress? How does she show up in a relationship? How does she show up at work? What does she currently says yes to and no to? How does she move her body? How does she move in the world? What does she think? What does she speak about? What does she care about? We need to get very specific to craft a vision of that future version of yourself in your reality, in the life that you live. Now, with that in mind, we kind of know the behavior that we want to have, we know how we want to feel. Now, what does that future version of yourself thinks in order to feel confident and do all these things so she can live this reality in her life? What does she believe? What does she believe about who she is? What does she believe about her body? What does she believe about food in relationship to her body? What does she believe and what does she think about on a day-to-day? That's the future self. And it has to be, I like to say of it, black and white, meaning it has to be like concretely written on a piece of paper. The future version of myself believes about, has these beliefs, she has these thought patterns, she feels confident, she feels assured, she feels comfortable, and she has all these behavior. So she's living the reality of a confident life and has to be written somewhere. This is not like something we think about once and that we kind of forget and put on the shelf. So for me, black and white paper, really important. I'm going to give you an example of this to make it really concrete for you. Today is 2026, right? May the 12th, 2026. And the version of myself today is the future self of my 2016 self. I'm going to repeat that again. The version of me in 2016, who I am today, the person who's speaking to you on the podcast, is the future version of myself from 2016. How did I get there? How did I get to be the version of me today who believes her body is a tool to experience life, who believes that her body is this place of wisdom that she respects, that she cares for, that she feels confident, that she takes time to dress and care for it? How did I come to believe this versus the 2016 version of me? That's when the future self work came in. I started by first investigating what I was thinking about myself and my body in 2016. I got to tell you, it was far from what I believe today. And I remember vividly sitting outside on my balcony, having my journal. So I always recommend for people to have a thought work, like a future self workbook where you can write all these things, and writing down in that book, in that journal, like the reality check of what I was thinking, feeling, and doing in relationship to my body and what I wanted to be in 2016. And it was a big gap. One of the starting points was I wanted to believe that my capacity to be confident, that my ability to show up on social media, because that was a big resistance point for me as a person in a larger body, to show up on social media. As I was writing this podcast episode, I remember vividly in those couple years, 2016 and 17, to making sure that my camera in my office, my video camera, was not picking up anything below my neck. Because I was deadly afraid of people finding out that I did not exist in a thin body. And here I was talking about health, talking about transformation, and existing in a larger body. And for me, that was a real threat to my survival. So I had the first layer of belief in 2016 was believing that it was possible for other people, not even me, just other women, to exist on the internet and to successfully lead a business, confidently show up on camera, that it was even just possible. That was my first layer of belief. We call that thought laddering, right? That's where I was in 2016. When you think about today, where I show up, I care of how I dress when I show up, but I can show up in a bathing suit and get a photo shoot in a bathing suit and put photos of me everywhere on the internet in a bathing suit. 2026, that's far off from 10 years ago. But I was aiming for that in 2016. Took about 3 to 4 years to get to that space, 2020 probably, where I got to that place. But it got me to look at where I was, what I believe, and then I build up my belief to get to a place where I am today in 2026. That's future self work. So I build up my belief, and almost every day, I would rewrite my intentional belief that I wanted to believe over and over. I did that for probably 2 to 3 years, constantly training my brain to see how and what I wanted to believe. Something that I actively practice. That's what we call intentional thinking. Because the human brain is not wired to be comfortable in future self-thinking. There's actually a number of studies that have been done about what they call the stranger effect. And I'm going to link in the show note the two studies that I'm referring to. One is called the stranger effect, where neuroscientists looked at the brain when the brain was thinking about thoughts about their current self and their past self. And the brain was lit up. And when the subject was asked to think about their future self, the various area of the brain that were showing activity significantly reduced. Because the brain is not, there's no neural pathway in a brain to think about the future self unless you intentionally train your brain to think about your future self in a way that feels safe to you. And then the extension of that in behavioral science is that when you do think about your future self, it influences your day-to-day decision. That's how you form the reality. When I started the podcast, I said, this is not woo-woo. This is not manifesting, sitting at the top of a green, luscious mountain. It's actually hard science. Because when we train our brain to think about our future self, about who we want to become, how we want to feel, what kind of behavior we want to have in the future, what reality we want to experience, it helps us impact the day-to-day small decision that we're making in order to line up our current little decision we're making day to day towards who we want to become. When we are not focused on the future self, because human brain being human brain, we're going to keep thinking about who we are and we're going to measure up our day-to-day small decision only to who we are today. And we will keep creating the same reality because we keep taking the same decision. When we are focused on the future self and who we want to become, there's more opportunity for us to line up our current decision in our day-to-day life with who we want to become. What choices do we need to make in the future in order to become that version of ourselves? I'll link to that study as well in the show notes. Now, in the beginning of the podcast, I was talking about my student experience of resistance, of avoidance, of high level of discomfort, of this blank state in their brain of not knowing what they wanted to believe about themselves and their body and their relationship to food. And that's very common. And it's most particularly prevalent in people socialized as women, because women are socialized to respect rules, to comply to standards that are put in front of them. One of my students really described it well, to base my decision of my life based on what people could potentially think of me in the future. Because we are trained to kind of level off our self-worth based on what other people think of us. So when we are brought into this world of, I want to change my current reality, I need to think, feel, and do differently, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of emotional energy for us to authorize ourselves to bypass our social conditioning in order for us to ask ourselves, what is it that I want? Not what other people want me to do, what other people want me to act in their life. What is it that I want? What is it that I want to believe about myself? And in some women, when they do this work and they get past what I call self-authorization, it's like, oh, really, Stephanie, can I really believe that about myself? I feel a little bit of cockiness and righteousness. I don't think that's okay for me to believe that I'm a great person, because it's so foreign. It's so foreign for us who spent decades thinking I'm not good enough because of my body, because of how I look, to all of a sudden go to the other side and think, no, I'm awesome. I'm great. I'm confident. That's a huge stretch. And that's where various technique of titration, habituation, and thought laddering comes in for us to help us believe. That was the example I was giving you about it's possible for fat women to be successful online, the example I was giving you earlier, like we need to titrate that thought to get there. But it comes from that layer of socialization that we need to unlearn. And this is why what I call the surface level coaching tool, the coaching process are not efficient when it comes to challenging behavior that are rooted in socialized learning and core belief. We need to go and like do the work at that level. And that's work, honestly, that takes time. This is not like we're not changing. We're not going to change our self-belief in like 6 weeks. This is like months and years of work. That's why for me, it's a combination of both education, right? Educating my client to understand the concept of future self, to understand thoughts, feeling, action, and result in your life, like educating them to understand the various frameworks so that they can continue self-coaching as they continue to increase their belief and moving towards their future self for years to come. And then they can take these framework, these knowledge, and apply it to other area of your life. Think about yourself, like body image, food, but then your business, your relationship, perhaps other enterprise you're going to be part of. You're using the same framework in different aspects of your life. So I want to give you a tool or a question to use for you to really start to get familiar with that future self psychology and apply it in your day-to-day life. So here's a question I want you to use ongoing. As you're making a decision in your day-to-day life and you've created that future self model based on your particular goal you want to work on, ask yourself the question, what would my future self who has achieved the goal, so think about in terms of body image, what would my future self who is at peace with her body think about this moment right now? What would my future self who is at peace with her body do right now in this situation? Now, here's the kicker. When you've asked those two questions, what would you think, what would you do? Then you need to take micro action as if you were your future self. Now, that's where the discomfort comes in. That's what the students were reflecting on. The discomfort was that not only did needed to imagine their future self, but they needed to put it on paper. And then the next step is actually to start taking action. So here's an example of that in terms of body image. When we think about our future self, we say my future self dressed comfortably, perhaps is even exploring her style, right? So when you make a decision about buying clothes today, how can you buy clothes that makes you feel comfortable? Perhaps it's the first layer is buying new clothes, right? Because there's so many women who refuse to buy clothes because they have to buy larger sizes. They have to donate the old clothes that they have, and they see that as financial labor. So how can we make a decision in the moment of purchasing these clothes today to buy comfortable clothes and perhaps even stylish clothes in the style that you want to be seen into the world? Micro decision in the moment now to build up to in the future having a closet only of clothes that fits your body, that feels all comfortable, and that are representing of the style you enjoy showing up in the world into. But it starts with the micro decision today. And for you to make that micro decision that align with the future self, that's the future self work. So this is the work of the future self. And that's exactly what we do in Groundwork. And that's why Groundwork is 12 months, is where we actually build that future version of ourselves, that map, that vision. And then we do the work of making micro decision on the day-to-day with me as your support. And the non-diet coaching certification is where you've done that work already for yourself. You're familiar with it. And then we learn to coach and train other people using that model to achieve their goal. So that was the psychology of future self work and how it's embedded in behavioral changes. I hope this helped you, my sister, and I'll see you on the next podcast. Want to coach behaviors, not bodies? Learn the mindset tool and the method that create real changes? Join the waitlist for the next cohort of the non-diet coaching certification at stephaniedodzi.com/waitlist. That's where the real training begins. And I'll see you on the other side, my sisters.